Alison, yeah, thanks for joining us tonight. Alison's been doing astrology for quite a long time. Originally was introduced to it by through a consultation with the famous Liz Greene. And Alison has started with the Faculty of Astrological Studies and has done the foundation certificate in 1988. And more recently, you've done the diploma. You might have heard that Alison is based in the south of France, and where there is a canopy of stars much more visible than where most of us are in the Cheltenham area. And I see if you go onto Alison's website, which is alisonastrology.net, you'll also see she is running an online course for beginners starting on the 24th of September.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, tonight's talk is called Mercury, a Psychopomp, a guide to the afterlife. And so, yeah, over to you, Alison.
Okay, brilliant. Let's see if I can share the screen. Oop. And I need to just work out how to, sorry, I do know how to do this normally. Yeah, to make that, yeah, that's it, isn't it? Great. Okay, yeah, thank you. So I began this research kind of accidentally, actually, because I wanted to start off on Instagram, and I started, like, when somebody came up in the news that somebody had died, somebody famous, I started looking at their death charts, and I was just really looking to see what that sort of said about the life as a whole. I was interested in how it compared with the birth chart, if there was one, and how that, yeah, just what the two showed, because there's something sort of quite significant when you look at the life as a kind of whole entity, I felt. And I started writing little bits anyway. And then I started to notice that Mercury seemed to be present sort of pretty much all the time. And so I started to do a little bit more research, and I went a bit deeper into that. So I was just looking at these charts first of all, actually. And here, I mean, here at 8:30, we have Pluto right on the ascendant. You don't actually get Pluto to your ascendant if you're in Cheltenham until an hour's time, at which point Mercury will also be exactly square the MC-IC axis. So I thought that was quite funny. So that Pluto was there, kind of ready to host the talk, as it were. So it's within the framework of thinking about the astrological glyphs as symbols that I started looking at Mercury. Of course, they're archetypal symbols, and if you do client work or even just kind of looking at your own charts, you realize that, you know, these symbols manifest as people and events, essentially, and they kind of work through the material world in that form. And so then the kind of question was also, so how do they work? What do they, yeah, how do they manifest in the material world? And one of the things that I just wanted to share with you was a little Mercury themed anecdote from the birth of my daughter, actually. So when my daughter was born, I already had a son who was 2.5, and he used to come and fiddle with my alarm clock, which was literally just like that one. And he fiddled with it, and I wasn't kind of setting the alarm anyway, so that was fine. And then I packed my bag to take to the hospital, and you know, the alarm clock kind of went into it. And just as this baby was arriving, this alarm clock went off. It was literally the weirdest thing. So essentially, he had set the time for her birth, which was 9:13 or something peculiar like that. And such was it that the midwife, who was just supposed to be delivering this baby, suddenly said, "Oh, what's that noise? What's that noise?" And kind of dashed over to the other side of the room and started raking through my bag. And I'm saying, "Look, hang on, please, come back." Anyway, Caris has Mercury exactly on the ascendant. And so that's one way there in which Mercury, the gods, the myths, manifested through my life anyway. Yeah, so So sort of moving on from that and just sort of thinking about that, what is a psychopomp and how does that manifest? So psychopomp comes from the Greek word, whatever that says in Greek, and it literally means the guide of souls. Psyche, soul, and pompous, which is the conductor or the guide. And Wikipedia tells us that they are creatures or spirits, angels, demons, or deities, and they exist in many religions whose responsibility is to escort the newly deceased souls from earth to the afterlife. Okay, so that's interesting. So why not see that in the death chart then? And is that in fact the case? So the idea of the psychopomp, it exists in many religions, actually. There's Anubis, and I think we've got the Valkyries who are in the Norse myths. And so the existence of this psychopomp figure through the myths kind of suggests to me that it has a reality on some level, just like, in fact, the herald did, if you like, the herald heralding my daughter's birth. So it was kind of starting from that standpoint that I wanted to examine it a little bit in a little bit more detail. So the idea of Mercury as psychopomp comes from a long time ago, comes from the Greek, appears in various of the sort of Greek writings. So this was the hymn to Hermes. Also that he should only be the appointed messenger to Hades, who, though he takes no gift, shall give him no mean prize. So Hermes, Mercury, and I do use them fairly interchangeably, was going to benefit. I mean, this was a big thing. And I think Zeus himself was Mercury's father, Hermes' father. So he's conferring this gift on his son, and Mercury sometimes in astrology is treated as a bit of a lightweight. I think he has a lot more depth, actually, and there's a lot more to be explored in his mythology. In the last book of the Odyssey, that begins with the epiphany of Hermes. The suitor's ghosts were called away by Hermes of Kylena, bearing the golden wand with which he charms the eyes of men or wakens whom he wills. He has a lot of power, does Mercury. No wonder we all kind of get so panicked when he goes retrograde. And then Claire Martin says, as a messenger of the gods, Mercury's function is to carry messages from one world to another. Hermes was the only god in Greek mythology who could visit all the worlds. And so we don't argue with Claire. She knows what she's talking about. So let's have a look at some charts. I've got quite a lot of charts. And so one of the questions arises, what am I actually looking for? And one thing that I'm definitely looking for is really, really close aspects. I'm not interested when I come to look at death charts in aspects of 3 degrees. I do very strongly feel that if the universe is showing us something, it can do it within 1 degree, no question. And I think that about all my research, actually. So, I mean, it's different if you're doing a natal chart, then I would use much wider degrees, of course. But I think if you're looking at something like this, then it has to be pretty exact. So the Queen. So a few key points about her chart. I'm sure lots of you know it already. Sun in Taurus, signature of dependability and staying power, as well as her deep love of nature, shared with her friend David Attenborough, of course. The moon in Leo is a fire sign, symbolizing her royalty and showing her innate warmth. So I think that used to come through, and that's the ruler of the North Node. Now, the nodes are important in these death charts. The ascendants in Capricorn, chart ruled by Saturn in Scorpio at the apex of that T-square. It's the planet of adherence to responsibility and to duty, and known for a dry sense of humour, of course, and capacity for very hard work, which she clearly had. Mercury in Aries, so a fairly direct and honest mode of communication, which she may have had to curb sometimes, I expect. And Venus in Pisces, which I think is lovely, actually, and was slightly unexpected when I looked. I mean, there's a romantic streak there, imaginative and open to collective emotion. Now, Mars is important here because this point at 20 degrees of Aquarius, is sort of comes up in the death chart. Aquarius is the sign of the people, and showing that it was for her people that she was prepared to fight, I think. And it also rules the fourth house of endings. The water houses, you know, the fourth, the eighth, and the 12th seem to be important in these charts. And Jupiter in Aquarius is conjunct Mars, so finding meaning through social ideals and through her people seems to be the case. So moving on. So the Queen's time of death was officially given at 10 minutes past 3, but sources close to the Queen, and this was put on Instagram actually by Victor Oliver, who I think from his days at The Lady as a journalist has got sort of a lot of royal connections and things like that in the royal household. And someone had said to him, and I think also said on YouTube, I can't remember her name, lady somebody, 1437. And this is what I've used, and it works really, really well. So what we're looking for is Mercury in his role as the psychopomp, aspects of 1 degree or less, especially to the chart ruler, dispositor of the sun, and the ruler of the north node. These are the things that seem to be relevant. The water houses, sometimes the second house, and sometimes the ninth. Okay. So when we look at the transits for 1437, I just realised that that's actually for London. Anyway, it won't affect, fortunately, the Mercury transits. Transiting Mercury was retrograde that day, had just retrograded, or had just gone direct. And it's in Libra in the 9th house. It's conjunct her Pars Fortuna. So that's less than 1 degree. Now, Pars Fortuna is something that's not used a lot. I mean, I'm sure Chris Mitchell uses it in his horror stuff. And I do think it's relevant, actually. I do find it kind of resonates with charts. So transiting retrograde Saturn, which is the chart ruler, is conjunct the transiting moon here. Okay, and these are both conjunct the natal Mars, which rules the 4th house of endings. So there we have the chart ruler and the moon conjunct that house of it. And so the moon sometimes acts as well as a trigger for things. I mean, it does in lots of things, so I'm sure you're aware of that. And then transiting moon Saturn is quincunx and semi-sextile the nodal axis. And this is a really, really close connection. So, and the natal ascendant, of course. And there's something odd about the quincunx. I mean, I know in astrology, in natal astrology, it can just be seen as a little bit difficult, sort of like a skew eye, because it doesn't look directly at anything. But in ancientsymbols.com on their website, it says that since ancient times, the quincunx pattern has been a geometric symbol of a sanctified universe. It signifies the ability of an individual to ascend from the 4 physical elements to the exalted and enlightened 5th one. A potential that's not easy to realize sometimes. So I think this is incredibly important. And these quincunxes appear again and again in these charts. So it's really, really interesting, this idea of kind of being taken up to another plane through the quincunx. Transiting Saturn is just 1 minute from an exact quincunx to the north node. There we are. Transiting Venus, the dispositor of the sun. Where is she? She's over here. Yeah. Applying to a quincunx with natal Mercury down here. And that lacks just 27 minutes of arc. So then moving on to the progressions, which I've now put on in the middle ring, because the progressions, obviously, they're an internal clock. So whilst the transits are registering something external, then the progressions are registering perhaps the internal factor of this passing over. And here we have progress Mercury in opposition to natal Mars, quincunx the ascendant. Progress Mercury is here. There we are, in opposition to that little sort of collection there of planets. And obviously, again, then quincunx or semi-sextile, the north node. And the moon's the north node ruler. So progressed Venus at the end of the 12th progressed house here is really, really close to the ascendant. So, oh yeah, I've got it for Balmoral there. That's right. Yeah. So that's really interesting as well. It's like that Venus that was dispositing the sun. It didn't quite make it over the ascendant, which is, yeah, it just kind of got to the end of the 12th. And so all these points, Mercury is very definitely present, and this moon, which is just super interesting, is the North Node ruler, with this Mars, which is the god of the endings here, are all present in this chart. And I'm sure it was a peaceful death. I mean, there's that sort of just movement away from the earthly plane. So we'll look at a few more. There's a lot of charts actually, so I hope you'll bear with me. That's kind of the point, but it's quite intense. So Billy Graham, who was a preacher, I have some information. Yeah, American evangelist. Lots of us will remember him. A born-again preacher who was just incredibly successful. I think he drew bigger crowds than Taylor Swift. I read somewhere actually, and he had an astonishingly long life, lived well into his 90s, like the Queen. He received an honorary knighthood. He had a, Congressional Gold Medal, Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation Freedom Award, lots and lots of things. And he was just incredibly successful at what he did, which was evangelizing, essentially, preaching the word of God. So he's got Sun, Venus, and Mercury in Scorpio in the 8th house. So this talks about passion, intensity, sensitivity, deeply emotional, and deep, deep conviction, I do think. And the sensitivity will be compounded by that trine to Chiron too. And just, I think, a perception there with that trine to Chiron of the awareness, with the 12th being the collective unconscious, of the pain, really, of the collective unconscious, actually. So Mars in Sagittarius in the 9th, co-ruler of Scorpio stellium, is the house of faith and spirituality, and the sign of faith and spirituality too. Closely conjunct the moon. So this was an instinctive thing, he was doing this from instinct. It was simply who he was. And they're both disposited by Jupiter in Cancer down here in the 4th. So he's creating this family in God. I think it's a real kind of, let's make a big tribe, a tribe of God, and all kind of go back to the roots, the spiritual roots that we should be from. Family through faith, yeah. Ascendant in Aries, again, ruled by that Mars in the 9th. So there's a sense of a real spiritual quest, I think, as he goes out into the world to conquer it with his faith. And then I was interested in that Saturn in Leo, which looks to me like the shadow or the fear that, maybe it was all about him. Yeah, I thought that was quite interesting too. But that ties in obviously to his moon and Mars. So it's going to enhance the conviction, isn't it? And also enhance his determination too in Leo. And Pluto down there conjunct the IC. I mean, there's something about power, isn't there, too? Always in these kinds of things, probably. And intensity, no doubt. So, interesting man. So what do we have in the transits chart? Transiting Mercury is trine natal Pluto, which is the co-dispositor of the sun. Where's it gone? That's transiting Mercury. Trining the natal Pluto down here. Transiting Venus is in Pisces and square the nodes. I mean, that's interesting in itself. And that Venus, which is so close to Neptune, it's just this man is going home, really, the spirituality of it. And Venus, closely conjunct Neptune. Transiting nodes are square to the natal sun by 11 minutes of arc. So this is suggesting to me a change of direction. When you get the nodes squaring a personal planet or squaring the nodes, a change of direction. So a move away, then this is from the earthly plane, changing direction to the other planes. Transiting Mars is quincunx natal Jupiter, which is exact to 1 minute of arc. Where's that gone? Yeah, up here. And natal Jupiter is down here in the 4th house. And Mars is also, transiting Mars is also square the ascendant descendant in the death chart, and it's just ingressed into the 10th house in the death chart too. And Jupiter, yeah, exactly opposite Pars Fortuna there. So that's interesting too. Those are both the transiting planets. But we have an accurate time of death for him with an accurate place, obviously. So that's fine. And then you can bring in the secondary progressions, and that Mars is there conjunct Venus, Mars conjunct Venus and squaring the Sun. So that's the chart ruler with a Venus, which is maybe about love, I'm not sure, but it's definitely very prominent. Transiting Mercury, trining progress Jupiter. Again, all these things are coming in. Yep, trining progress Jupiter, as well as, and Jupiter then of course is on Pluto. And the transiting moon quincunx the progress north node. It's really interesting how they fit, that it all fits together. You know, there's the, so there's that one and that one. And it's a pattern that's built up with the progressions and the transits at the time, and you could probably build it up with all kinds of other things as well. But I mean, goodness, how much information can one actually deal with? Yeah, the ascendant at the time of passing, that's right, is conjunct Venus, which is nice too. I was just wondering why I've put this moon here. That's obviously relevant to something. Oh, yeah, the progressed moon is conjunct natal Saturn. Yes, of course it is. Right. And interestingly, the moon sun midpoint, I sometimes do look at midpoints, at 6 degrees Sagittarius is square the transiting Mercury and quincunx the natal Pluto and progressed Jupiter. So another thing to kind of fit into there. And that's up here. I haven't actually put it on the chart. So that's Billy Graham. So those are two elderly people who passed over peacefully. And so then the question arises, what happens if people pass over less peacefully? Do we still have Mercury present? So this is James Dean, and he's the rebel without a cause, of course. He's got an interesting chart, Mars, Saturn, Uranus, all very present. Aries ascendant with the Mars retrograde in Leo. So this need to be kind of seen and out there, but maybe difficult without retrograde Mars, might cause him to take risks. Uranus on the ascendant conjunct the North Node. Is that something fated? Who knows? Not me. A sensitive Scorpio moon, which would give him his brooding intensity, actually, because the 7th obviously can be how we meet the world as well. Sasportas says that in his book anyway. And that's definitely how he appears. He was very young when he died, I think 23, so he didn't get much chance to be brooding, but he did a good job while he was alive. And he had obviously, well, not obviously, but he did have a difficult life. His mother died when he was 9. And his father sent him to live with an uncle and aunt who lived in a Quaker household. He was an only child, so not the easiest of upbringings. So he's also got this detached Aquarian sun, which is ruled by that Uranus on the ascendant, and it's making that edgy quincunx to Pluto. You know, those quincunxes are difficult, especially Pluto in the 4th. And Mars, the chart ruler, is quincunx Venus. Now, I think this is quite interesting, actually, because Mars and Venus rule that sort of axis of incarnation, if you like, the ascendant and descendant. And there's that quincunx between them. And given what we've seen about quincunxes, was there something sort of difficult about the birth? I mean, maybe that's suggested by Uranus as well, which then sort of continued to play out in his life. I don't know. Let's have a look at the transits. So there's something about his death. And there's always this question about whether it could have been prevented, because he died when his Porsche Spider crashed, and it was probably not his fault. I think something pulled out on him. And there were all kinds of things about accidents with the parts of the car that kind of got distributed around the place afterwards, almost as if the car, well, you don't like to say it, but as if the car was cursed almost. And there's a story about him and Alec Guinness, which some of you may know, because I think Deb Holding has given a talk on the synastry between the two of them. And Alec Guinness talks about it as well in an interview with Michael Parkinson that you can find on YouTube. And it was essentially that he met this young man in LA, I think, sort of walking down the street, and they were both at a loose end, and they went and had dinner. And James Dean then sort of went to show Alec Guinness his car, which had just sort of been delivered and he was really excited about. And Alec Guinness describes having this really weird feeling coming over him and just saying, no, you mustn't drive that car. It'll be, it will not be a good thing. I can't remember if he exactly says it would be the death of you, but definitely you must not drive that car. And of course, young man just laughs it off. I mean, he's just got this beautiful Porsche that he's bought. He's not going to take any notice of that. And then, of course, he crashes. So, yeah. So could he have prevented it? I've no idea, but interesting to wonder. Transiting Mercury at the time of death is about to station retrograde. And this is something that we often find, actually, these Mercury stations. Transiting Uranus is conjunct the natal Mars. There we go. Quincunx the natal Venus, of course, because Mars is. And transiting Saturn is also sextile the natal Saturn. And the Sun-Moon midpoint, coming back to that up here, is trine Pluto, square the transiting Moon, and a semi-sextile to that Mercury and Neptune sort of little group here. So those are quite interesting. And we can look then at the progressions. And transiting Mercury, stationing retrograde, is quincunx the progressed ascendant. I mean, that's fascinating, isn't it? There it is, look. Stationing retrograde, quincunx the progressed ascendant. Progressed Mercury is opposite the progressed Neptune. Is it? Where is progressed Mercury, which we have lost? Yeah, here it is. Opposite progressed Neptune. So when you get an opposition, you always wonder if there was a choice. I have no clue. Or is that just something that was bound to happen? No idea. Progressed Mars is quincunx the Moon Sun midpoint here, 27 degrees. 11 minutes of arc, and trine the progressed ascendant across the 4th and the 12th. Yeah. Progressed ascendant is here. That's it, yeah. And transiting Saturn in the 8th is trine the progressed Pluto to 29 minutes of arc. I mean, Pluto hasn't moved much, obviously, but a little bit. So again, we're finding the quincunx Mercury stationing. He's kind of omnipresent, as always. And Saturn, Uranus are present as well. So we have those things. Interesting times. So we've had some old people, elderly people, I should say, sorry. We've had somebody who died in a car crash, tragically. So I just want to look at this one makes me quite sad, actually. And obviously this is something that happens when you keep staring at these death charts, you get a bit weepy. You just, oh no, this is Amy Winehouse. I think she was part of the 27 Club, wasn't she? Gemini ascendant, but no air in the chart. So Mercury is the chart and the North Node ruler, that North Node right on the ascendant. So there must be this urgent need to communicate, but it's got to be excavated from down here in this sort of 4th house where it's buried amongst the ancestors down there, and retrograde, and vulnerable in Virgo. I mean, you know, this is somebody who desperately probably wants to get it right, whatever it is, and super sensitive too. And the Virgo sun is square the nodes. And when a planet's on the bendings like that, it's kind of speaks of something that needs to be resolved, something that's going to be potentially a struggle, I think, in a lifetime, certainly something that's going to feature. So getting that sun to shine, you know, getting that sun out into the world was a thing. And through communication, because it rules the third, doesn't it? And the Mercury sensitivity, communication, you know, attention to detail. How do you do that when you've got that Neptune squaring it, and on the south node, you've come from this place where everything's kind of mystical and divine and all a bit vague, and you know, and then you want to be precise about things. And she has no water in the chart, or hardly any, just Saturn and Scorpio in the fifth. So again, perhaps a struggle to process emotions, or even to know what she feels. And I mean, I think there's always the suggestion, especially with that Neptune South Node, that, you know, processing emotion through alcohol and drugs, perhaps, but also the wonderful music which comes from that place, you know, that divine place, perhaps. But that Saturn in Scorpio is just profoundly sensitive and self-protective. And I don't know why I wrote maybe fearful of the dark. I thought that, and that was quite sad, actually. So how does the chart for her passing look? So the chart ruler's Mercury. In fact, everything's Mercury. But she was born on a Venus station. It was turning direct in just 19 hours time. And so here we've got transiting Mercury trine Neptune. There's something just very gentle about that, isn't there? Just, okay, this is easier, this world's too hard. That's how it makes me feel anyway. The transiting nodes are square natal Mercury to 14 degrees of arc. Here we have them. Transiting nodes squaring that natal Mercury. And transiting Mars is there too, of course, squaring natal Mercury, and conjunct the south node, squaring the sun as well. And then we've got Venus sextile natal Mercury and semi-sextile Venus, a sesquiquadrate. I'm not quite sure if that's relevant, but it's there and it's exact. And then the transiting sun is exactly quincunx the natal moon, and both of these planets are at 0 degrees. And I always feel there's something very new about a planet at 0 degrees, like it's a new leaf and it could just easily get crushed, or it could get maybe frostbitten and, you know, not really fulfill its potential. There's something a little bit fragile, whereas when it gets to 29 degrees, it's kind of like somebody's pushing on that sign with a thumb and you get the full sense of it. But here it's just almost exploring it. It's a real newness to it. So this is a quote. She died on 23rd of July 2011. The exact time of death is unknown. And the authorities said that she had probably been dead for several hours before she was pronounced dead by emergency workers. So I've drawn up the chart for noon. And then just having a look at the progressions. And transiting Mercury is also trine progress Neptune. I mean, that's fine, because Neptune doesn't move very much when you haven't lived very long. And the progress nodes are approaching the conjunction with the ascendant-descendant axis. I mean, that's something, isn't it? The progress nodes, they move quite slowly, but it's true that they are sort of closer than they were, noticeably, and very close there to the ascendant-descendant. And the progressed ascendant-descendant are their quincunx, the natal MC-IC axis. And there's this thing about this sort of cross of matter and the axis of incarnation, and about what that really means, and to be incarnated here in this world and then to leave it again, I think. And we've got Saturn square progressed ascendant descendant axis in Libra to just a few minutes of arc. Where's it gone? There's the ascendant descendant. Lost it. Anyway, trust me, it's there. Oh, it's here, Saturn, yeah. That's transiting Saturn, actually. So there we are. And I think this is just really sad. It looks like life was all a bit too much, but there we go. So the next one I wanted to look at actually was just a normal person, just to show somebody very kindly has allowed me to look at their grandfather's chart. And very surprisingly, we actually have a birth time for him. So his chart ruler is Venus, dispositor of the sun is Saturn. I've lost the sun. I've lost I've lost his. Oh yeah, Saturn and Uranus. And the ruler of the North Node is Venus too. That's the North Node here, close to the ascendant. He was born on a Mars station, interestingly, and between a Mars station and Mercury station, and he actually passed over on a Mars station too. And when you look, transiting Mercury is conjunct the transiting North Node and quincunx natal Mars. So transiting Mercury is conjunct the North Node. Is it indeed? Is that those are the secondary progressions, sorry. There we are, conjunct the North Node and quincunx the natal Mars, which is here. So, I mean, you know, if you ever wanted to see the Psychopomp in action with the nodes, that's super clear, I feel. The transiting Mercury, yeah, is also conjunct the natal Pars Fortuna. And the transiting moon is quincunx transiting Mars, just out of interest. I mean, that's just the time and place of death. So that's in the outer ring. The moon here is making a quincunx to Mars down here. And progress Mercury, quincunx the natal moon. Let's just find that one. Progress Mercury is quincunx the natal moon, which I've now lost. Oh, sorry. Hang on. Yeah, I must remember not to do that. Progress Mercury, quincunx the natal moon. I'm sure it's there somewhere. Most of us have a moon in our charts. I'm blowed if I can find. Oh, sorry, it's here. Yes. Okay. And progress Venus is retrograding towards conjunction with the progress Sun in the 12th. And that's an absolute Kazemi, actually. That's lovely. With the that's a real going home thing. Pelly had that in his chart, I think, if I remember correctly. I just think that's really lovely. Okay, so far so good. And then I wanted to have a look at JFK's chart, because if ever there was a sudden death, that was surely it. I mean, President of the United States, clearly a Democrat, served at the height of the Cold War. He was a World War II hero, which I didn't know until I started looking him up, but had serious problems with his back and spine as well, which I feel may be related not only to that Chiron, but also to Cancer, which is, I suppose, technically in detriment there. Cancer ruling the bones and the spinal cord. And Chiron's also sextile Fortuna, which I quite like, but square Pluto. Mercury and Taurus in the 8th, in mutual reception with the 11th house moon. So suggesting depth of thought and values around social and political transformation, perhaps. The ascendant's in Libra, and he was known for his charm, wasn't he, and good looks. But he also preached an agenda for peace and equality and was remembered for his initiatives on civil rights. And the fact that Venus is in Gemini in the 8th, I think added some gravitas to his sociable nature and perhaps some depth to that value system. The sun is unaspected, completely unaspected in Gemini, acts on its own in the realm of shared resources and transformation. I find that super interesting. I don't think this was a man to be tied down in any way, shape or form. And I mean, his mistress is legendary, aren't they? Which is clearly, you know, he's got this Uranus here in the 5th, square that Venus, which is speaking to his independence of self-expression, part of which was probably his love affairs. And then Saturn in the sign of the ancestors, and the moon sun midpoint conjunct it as well, actually. Ambition and leadership conjunct the MC like that. But the only planet in water, so it suggests to me a real caution around emotion and a fear of the emotional realm a little bit, perhaps. And it's making no aspects to personal planets. It seems to be a symbol of his father as well, who I think, I mean, there were 9 of them in the family, and the father was kind of terribly ambitious for them all. And, you know, it was a real clan, a real sort of dynasty. And then there's a lack of fire in this chart. And the lack of fire sometimes drives you towards that element, which is about the quest, about the, you know, about the confidence and the burning kind of desire to have this vision, you know, which must have been perhaps overwhelming. So I've kind of put him all together with this one. So the chart ruler is Venus. Dispositor of the sun's Mercury, ruler of the north node is Saturn. He was born on a Mercury station and close to a Uranus station as well. So I've got the transits in the middle ring and the progressions are on the outside. So you can see here that it's a half nodal return for a start. I mean, so these are always kind of points at which you might change direction or you know, something significant might occur. And then transiting Mars, Venus, which I have lost. Yeah, down here. Transiting Mars, Venus is quincunx Mercury. Very simply. There we go. It's there. So even something like an assassination. And Mercury's kind of set up. There it is. The transiting ascendant descendant axis, because obviously we've got that fairly accurately for this chart, is trine sextile the ascendant descendant axis of his birth chart, which is again interesting. There's something that's sort of quite easy and flowing about that, isn't there? Transiting Saturn is quincunx the natal moon. Where's he gone? Yeah, transiting Saturn to the natal moon, 17 degrees. It's over here. That's right. Yeah. That's a difficult one as well. And then the transiting moon is quincunx and semi-sextile the nodes exact to the minute. Yep, transiting moon, that's fine. Yep, the natal nodes, there they are, look, 11 degrees, that's awkward. And then we've got this weird kind of collection of things at 9 degrees, which I was a bit weirded out by since my son's at 9 degrees. But anyway, it's not in any of these signs, I'm quite pleased to say. And then I did discover, so I was looking for something at 9 degrees in the birth chart because I thought, well, what's this all about? And it's a Chiron ascendant midpoint. That was all I could find. But that Chiron does seem to quite stand out just there, doesn't it? And it makes that trine there. So again, what does that mean? I don't know, but it's interesting that all these things are kind of connected together, these 9 degrees and you know, pretty much to the minute. Very strange. And then the transiting sun is trine the natal Chiron there to within just 19 minutes of arc, which is kind of highlighting that Chiron again, sort of pointing up and saying, yep, I am significant. The progressed sun is quincunx natal Uranus. Sorry, quincunx progressed Uranus. Maybe that says something about, you know, the suddenness and kind of horrificness of the death. And progressed Jupiter is conjunct the IC of the assassination chart. Now that's also quite interesting, I think. And transiting Venus is opposition progressed Mars to 9 degrees of arc. So again, you can find all these points sort of in the chart, and Mercury always seems to be there. Yeah, what do we move on to next? So I was looking for Mercury, and I turned this chart round actually, and just out of interest put the sort of the chart for his death on the inside, and this also kind of revealed something really interesting. Much more interesting than I was expecting actually, because the natal Mercury is here at 20 degrees. It's in the 4th house of endings, on the cusp of the 4th house. So in the sort of previous half an hour, I guess. It was moving through the fourth house. It's just reached the cusp, and it moved to the third house at 12:33. Now, his killing was timed at 12:30. So there it is. It's just on the cusp of that sort of house of endings before it moves away into the next house. So that's also super interesting, I feel. Yeah, so that's actually the point at which I was just going to pause for a minute and see if there were any questions before just talking about the conversation that I had with the Psychopomp. I hope I haven't gone through it all too quickly. I'm aware there's a lot of detail here. I'm happy to go back over anything if anyone would like me to.
So yes, if you'd like to speak, then please raise a hand.
Yeah. I mean, I feel what I need here is an Excel chart, really. It's not what I'm best at, Excel charts, sort of. And I mean, how many different sort of permutations would there be as well? It's, you know, it's that I had to put on my Excel chart, which I'm not all that excited about in the first place, but I feel it needs something like that really to kind of, and maybe in the end there is no pattern, you know, or no pattern that we're going to ever be able to discern, because there's lots of things, aren't there? When you start looking at the midpoints, and I've looked at solar return charts too, and you can link those in. I've looked at directions and you can link those in. So in the end, you have to sort of, I mean, I say keep it simple. It's not even remotely simple, but at least limit the amount of information that you can try and process, really.
You mentioned Mercury stations as well. That seemed to a closeness to Mercury stations. What do you draw out of that?
I think it's just sort of highlighting the Mercury element, really. It's just like when Mercury is particularly prominent in something, it is what I feel. So yeah, I think just that, really. Yeah, I can't think of, I mean, I don't really know what to make of it all, except that there he is, you know, as the Psychopomp in the charts. I believe, and this quincunx, which is so strange, you know, kind of spiriting people away in a sense. I mean, I'd love to know if anyone's got any comments on this.
I guess if Mercury's at a station, then it's transiting very slowly, isn't it? So compared to what it would usually be, so that focus is really,
it's
really focused.
Yeah, but I mean, they're not all Mercury stations, are they? So you know, and the progressions aren't Mercury stations, so it doesn't, you can't sort of explain it like that either. And I don't know, I don't think it's easy to explain all the connections. I do feel the nodes come out as sort of very significant in these charts. They do seem to be highlighted, in the rulers of the nodes too.
Amy made a comment. Would you like to if I ask you to unmute Amy, would you like to talk about that?
I just put my light on, actually.
Oh, sure. I was with my mom in February when she passed, and I noted the time that she died. So I was just pulling up the time of her death and her natal chart, and Mercury was at 26 degrees, 34 minutes in Capricorn, and opposite her moon, her sun at 26 degrees, 20 minutes.
Right.
Yeah. And her Mercury was in the fourth house, and her sun was in the 10th.
Yeah.
So that was very much spot on. So felt very validating to see that.
Yeah.
So thank you.
I think it's quite comforting, isn't it, actually, when you look at it? And
I am too. I am. It was
yeah,
very comforting, very validating, and very, like I said, it was very, and it was not a, it felt like I mean, I was there. I mean, it was like a kind of a long process, but it
mhm,
felt like when she passed, she's just, it felt like like you said, a coming home of that
right.
fourth house experience.
Yes, that's super interesting. Yes, well, thank you for sharing that.
Yes. Thank you for sharing everything. This has been fascinating. Thank you.
I mean, I can go on and just finish the material. I must just open this window because I think hopefully it's got a little bit cooler outside now, so I might get a bit of a draft in. And I'll just so I wrote an article on this for the Astrological Journal, the AA Journal, and when when the article was published, I was contacted by someone who just said to me, "I'm a psychopomp," and he does want to remain sort of anonymous. He's an elderly man, lovely man, and I've had several talks with him, and he's happy for me to share his chart, which in itself is really interesting, actually. So I'm just calling him David, and he was born on a Mercury station, of course. So he's got that Mercury really kind of highlighted in his chart. So it's a fire and earth chart, and he describes it. I mean, he knows astrology, and he describes it as a sort of embodied chart. That the point was that he really had to be embodied in order to be the psychopomp and to go out into the other planes to do this work. And the really key thing in his chart is this Uranus Sun Cazimi here. And of course, because nothing is ever an accident, my progressed sun was exactly to the minute on that sun when we first had our Zoom meeting. So that's quite interesting, which wasn't that long ago. So it lacks air, the chart, which might expect difficulty with detachment, perhaps. But I feel that detachment becomes much more literal in this chart, in this kind of sense of disembodiment almost. So maybe a lack of air is perhaps a good thing because he needs to come back, obviously, to the body. It also lacks water, which perhaps suggests he might not be in tune with his feelings or might process them through something else. And a lot of people do process them through Neptune, I find, when there is no water in the chart. And Neptune is quite key here. It's square the node, so it's on the bendings. And there's this idea of kind of spirituality. And again, it's an embodied spirituality. It's in Virgo. Yeah, so that's interesting too. And that's less than 1 degree, that particular square. And Saturn is at 0 degrees of Aries in the 12th, and it rules the MC, and it disposits Jupiter, which obviously whips is to do with meaning and things like that, meaning and faith. It trines Mars as well. So where is Mars? Oh yeah, it's over there, retrograde in his chart. So I think, we're coming back to this 0 degree, and it's in Aries. It's the 1st degree of the zodiac. There's something really new and fresh about this. But Saturn, of course, Saturn's the gatekeeper too, and it's in the 12th house, the 12th of the collective unconscious. I mean, that, the suggestion of the psychopomp there, the gatekeeper in the house of the collective unconscious, 0 Aries. I think that's really interesting. The Sun Uranus Cazimi in Taurus, and so his core energy, that Taurus being the most embodied, I always feel, of all the signs, it's diffused with that detached kind of spirituality, and there's something very detached about Uranus. I can't think of another word for it. Mars is the chart ruler in Sagittarius, so we've got this idea of faith and the quest again. And then he was very keen that I include the galactic center, which moves very slowly. I think it's got to 27 Sag now, but at that time was 25. And it makes the finger of God with Mercury, and I couldn't get it up so it was aspected, but with Mercury and Pluto. So we've got the Psychopomp and Hades and the galactic center here. And they're tied into the moon as well, at least the galactic center is. So that's obviously really interesting as well. And then Venus on the ascendant, because he was really clear about the need to approach everything with love. And I think you find that in a lot of sort of spiritual teachings, don't you? Just the idea of approaching things with love, and that's really the key to everything. So he's an absolutely lovely man, and he shared with me some of his visions. And so the way it works for him is that these are dreams essentially. Where have I got my piece of paper? Yeah, so these are essentially dreams, and so he goes to sleep, and sometimes then he finds himself in a place and other people are there, and he's even talked about meeting people that he knows who have died as well and helping them across. He talked about rowing his father across the River Styx. He said that was the thing that is kind of seared on his mind, I think, but also other people that he knows. But he mentioned that if there's trauma involved, then the psychopomps are really needed, because people don't always find it as easy to pass over. There's a sort of a shock, I think. So he describes himself as having an initial impression of something and other people around. He doesn't recall everything, but these dreams, he says, are in the fourth dimension, astral dimension. He says there are 10 dimensions altogether, up to the galactic center. And he said that when he was younger, he was aware before he woke up of sort of every morning he would like float down all these stairs from wherever he'd been, sort of up in the other dimensions. A couple of things he said after the Paris attacks, on Friday the 13th, 2015, that night actually, before he read the news in the morning at the Bataclan Theatre, he said he dreamt he was boarding a French TGV and taking a large number of people to safety, which he relates to, the Psychopomp work. And he also says that he was leading a platoon to safety as well. His soldiers had been killed in Dunkirk and were still lost. So he says that he's not alone, although he's often the guide, and sometimes he just has to give advice. Of course, he also tells us that everything's the same, and says that it's not a good idea to try and give an exact time to death, because death's a little bit like sleep when it's just a natural death, and you can drift in and out of it a little bit to some extent until finally, you take that step and pass over. So I think these are all really interesting ideas, and I just find them really comforting as well, actually, the thought that there are people there who can guide you and help you if you need it. He says the most important thing, and I will stress this, is not to be afraid. Because he says it's all the same, there's no time, everyone's here. And these are things that we read in all kinds of spiritual material, of course. Time's only linear on this planet. What did I write here? Yeah, I was interested in some of the stuff that I'd learned earlier about alchemy as well, and Uranus, and how Uranus is the intellect, the ability to reflect and see things objectively. But it's the severing of the mind from the body in alchemy, a sort of a state of dissociation or physical death. So it's interesting that that's conjunct the sun there. And Mercury, of course, is key in alchemy too. I feel these are connected somehow, but I'm not quite sure how yet. I have much more research to do. And I just have one last slide to share with you, which is just an alchemy slide, because I think these are just amazing, and that they kind of potentially do describe sort of something connected to the death process somehow too. And I think I'm done. That's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Unless anyone really dramatically wants to add something, I think we'll wind up this session of the evening. So thank you very much, Alison, for an unusual talk, I'd say, which has led us in some interesting directions. I think some of us will be going away and pulling out a few charts and looking at that further.